See, I have my own mic. Hey, everyone. I'm a walker. So I'm Allison Calhoun-Brown. Thank you so much, Provost Walker, for that kind introduction. CSUN is very fortunate to have Mary Beth Walker. She is one of the people that has been a long-time leader at Georgia State and one of the people that we miss the most. So I'm very, very glad to be here. And Mary Beth, thank you for the invitation to speak. And thank you to the whole CSUN community for your hospitality and warm welcome to me today. So today we're going to be talking about improving student success through data and institutional change, because I come to share the Georgia State story, but I never want to represent that Georgia State has arrived in any way. We are all fellow travelers on the road to student success. And many of the pitfalls and, troubles along the journey, trust me, we share those troubles. When we continue to share those troubles, but we're making some progress. And so I'm really glad to share about some of the things that are working. Nationally, the country faces a big challenge. And that's what this slide really draws us to, that since the 1970s and all the access work that's gone on to increase college going in the United States, when you look at baccalaureate degree attainment by the age of 24, we've made some progress in some income quartiles. If you look at the highest income quartile, the graduation rate has doubled, going from 40% to 82%. And the third income quartile, graduation rate has doubled there too. But look at the bottom income quartile. Despite all the work that we did as a nation, the graduation rate went from 6.2% to 8.3%. Right? These are the students disproportionately in that bottom income quartile and that second income quartile that Georgia State serves a lot. And there are a lot of students who are in those circumstances. This slide talks about the percentage of low-income students in U.S. public schools. And you look at the region that I'm from, Georgia, it's all dark red. In fact, it's dark red almost uniformly across the bottom half of the United States. And California, 55% of students in the public schools come from low-income families. These are the families that Georgia State University serves. This is Georgia State University, the Atlanta campus. It is very much an urban campus. Right? The big buildings, the city, I drive in usually with the heavy traffic. The skies don't open up, right? This is a really pretty picture, so I try to include it, but it doesn't always look like that. But it is, just mixed in among the city, are some of our buildings. That white building is the building that I work in, and just that we could point them out. But 35,000 students on the Atlanta campus, about 20,000 students on the 5 suburban Perimeter College campuses. Perimeter College is a 2-year associate granting access institution, and the Atlanta campus of Georgia State University is a Research One university. We were consolidated with Perimeter College in 2016. One of the reasons is that the profile of student that went to Perimeter College and the profile of student that went to Georgia State University was very similar. All right? So Georgia State has about 60% Pell-eligible families. A Pell-eligible family last year had an average income of about $25,000 for a family of 4. So that's low income. Right? There is no majority population at Georgia State. It's a very diverse environment. About 40% of the students who attend Georgia State are African American. The fastest growing populations at Georgia State are the Latinx students and Asian American students, and white students make up about 35% of the population. So it's a very diverse population that we serve at Georgia State. And to tell you the the truth, Georgia State University is not the flagship or very well known. Everyone knows about, well, these days everyone knows about Georgia, right? Because Georgia's got a great football team, and it's in Athens, and it's a land-grant university, and it's the flagship for the state of Georgia. And the other school that's a research university in the state of Georgia is Georgia Institute of Technology, which is one of the most prestigious public universities in the country. And then there's Georgia State, right? And Georgia State, some of what it's best known for, at least historically, is its location, right? It's really almost bisected by the King Historical District. It's less than a mile, less than maybe almost a half a mile from where Dr. King preached about opportunity for all, his church, the Ebenezer Baptist Church, his birthplace up there in the corner, the crypt where he and his wife are buried in the Center for Nonviolent Social Change. And it's just so ironic that the place where Dr. King preached about equality well into the 1960s, he's come from the Georgia State University archive, was a segregated institution, right? No promise of opportunity, no promise of equality, no opportunity to even generate an opportunity gap, right? Because there were no minority students of any kind attending Georgia State University, again, well into the 1960s. And this legacy persisted. This is Georgia State starting about 2003, where you saw nothing to write home about graduation rates, right? In the white students, 31.6%, African American students, 25%, Hispanic students, about 22%, typical achievement gaps, and very poor outcomes in terms of graduation rates and ethnicities. You add to that, since 2008, the number of underrepresented minorities at Georgia State has risen dramatically. All right, so now we're talking about almost 71% of our student body. The number of low-income students since the time of the recession also risen dramatically. And on top of that, we let that SAT score go down 33 points. You're like, why? This is usually not a point of pride. Many presidents would not do this. But we found that SAT score did not predict success outcomes at Georgia State anyway. Their grade point average didn't go down like that. But their SAT score did go down, purposefully. President let it go down. It wasn't a mistake, right? We let it go down. And since the time of the recession, state appropriations were cut by $40 million. This is not a recipe for student success, at least according to, the variables that we study and the data that we look at. This would not be what you would want to bring to the table if you were going to try to produce student success outcomes. And all these things are a problem. It is a problem. If the state cuts you $40 million, that's a problem. K through 12 education, sometimes also a problem in terms of the preparation of the students. Having a lot of low-income students can be really challenging. All that is true. But at Georgia State, what we started to ask ourselves more and more were, are we part of the problem? And of course, the answer to that was yes. And so we started to look at the data, and Georgia State is very disciplined about looking at the data for insight into what it tells us about what's going on. And in 2015, we looked at the data and found that almost 20% of the students who confirmed that they were coming to our institution did not come. That's a problem. And when we looked at the makeup of the students who did not attend, not only did not attend Georgia State, but didn't attend any university, we went through the clearinghouse, they didn't enroll anywhere. This is what we found. We found that there were almost 300 students in that category, that they were disproportionately from underrepresented minority groups, that a lot of them were first-generation students, that most of them were low-income students, but if you look at their high school GPA, 3.34, they should be in college somewhere, right? These are good, strong, A-, B+ kind of students that weren't going to school anywhere. And so we really started to do a deep dive into, well, why aren't these students enrolling in school? And we found that there were a lot of hidden obstacles to enrollment. You know, some of the things like the FAFSA form, right? You know, the FAFSA form, for those of you who know it, and everybody knows it in here, but have actually filled it out, it's really an IRS form disguised as, you know, something else. You know, I have two children who went to college last, they're freshmen in the fall, and for the first time I actually filled out the FAFSA. It was not a good experience and not an easy thing. And my husband and I are like, ooh, we got a lot of degrees. Between us, we are really struggling to figure out how to fill this form out properly. And so, simple things like, verification requests, and you may know this, that the number of students who are verified at Georgia State is above 30%. In the summer, they're away from their advisor, they're away from their teachers, they're asked to verify some strange form. Really hard to do. Even things like immunization can have really negative consequences. Good public health reasons for doing immunization. And if you have a regular family doctor, really easy to get that immunization form filled out. However, if you have health care through the clinics, here a little, there a little, and someone asks you to present your immunization record, it can be a challenge, right? So we found all kinds of things. So we started to personalize our interaction with students beforehand, and we actually push all kinds of messages out to them. These are not messages related to admission. It's after they're admitted. We ask them all kinds of questions that are designed to help us put together a program of student support. We have a portal that guides them through next steps, which is very helpful. And we also launched an AI-enhanced chatbot. And I understand that CSUN has chatbots as well. The chatbot works 24 hours a day to answer questions. Ours is a two-way chatbot, and we found that it is most active after about 10 o'clock. Nobody is working after 10 o'clock at Georgia State University. And the students really like it as a tool. And so we have all kinds of guided conversations that we've developed, ways that we can nudge them. They can ask us questions, because it's complicated. This was our FAFSA tutorial. We mapped it, all the decision points. Very complicated. And so now we're trying to communicate with students as students. Pictures, emojis. Literally, I write something and then I give it to a student to reinterpret. Because despite my best efforts, and I try sometimes really hard, it's never appropriate for the student population. And we've thought that when we turn this on, that there would just be a few, answers and questions and answers. Within the first 3 months, there were 200,000 questions and answers through the chatbot, and the average response time was 7 seconds. We would never be able, obviously, to scale up to answer that. And couple years later, the 3-year drop in summer melt is more than 37%. This year, that represented an extra 362 students who joined our freshman class. It works so well with new students that we rolled out a chatbot for continuing students. And you can see there's some really positive results working with this chatbot. We did a random control trial, and these are the results. For a lot of transactional items, like students who started the semester with the balance, or who had an account balance that needed to be paid, who worked with financial aid to get it paid, or meeting with an advisor, being prompted by the chatbot seems to really make a difference. Another thing that we saw was that 50%, again, we have this information. Every college, every university has this information. We had never looked at it. We looked at the retention rate of the bottom 10% of the students that we admitted to the university. Right? We know what that distribution looks like. These were students who were fully admissible. This is the Atlanta campus. These were not actually remedial students, though we do have a parallel program now at Perimeter College that shows very similar outcomes. But these were not remedial students. We looked at their retention rate, and to our horror, it was 50% for the lowest 10% of the freshman class who were most academically at risk, right? We really focus a lot on, this is not you're at risk because you're a first-generation student, or you're at risk because you're an African-American student. These students are at risk because of their academic performance in high school. And so we admitted them to something called Success Academy. The 400 last year, the 400 most at-risk freshmen, based on their academic performance, were invited to come to Georgia State. They were admitted to Georgia State on one condition, that they come in the summertime. And in the summertime, they took 7 hours of collegiate classes. Not a bridge program in terms of preparatory classes. This was college. These are college classes. Usually they took either the first English class or the second English class if they had some dual enrollment credit. And they take a social science, either history or political science, because no matter the major in our curriculum, every student needs those classes. And they take that class and an orientation class in the summertime. And we throw everything that we know about student success at those students. So it's intensive advisement, it's all kinds of support, academic skills training, financial literacy training. There's a lot of social activity and programming that goes on. And we saw that they really did a lot better. The bottom line is that the retention rate that had been 50%, this is almost unbelievable, but it's true. The retention rate that had been 50% went to 87%. And it's held at 87% for the last 6 years, 87, 88%. It's never been below 86% for 6 years. All we did was change how we admit them and how we support them. And I love this statistic. The 6-year graduation rate for the Success Academy class of 2012 was 62%, where the 1-year retention rate had previously been 50%. So it's possible to do really some dramatic things. We saw that about our students were going through nearly 2.5 majors. Now, this audience, most people will look, there's no big deal about that, but 2.5 majors is a lot of time, it's a lot of money. And I know you know that. Our students come into, orientation into our university, and they experience a lot of overwhelming choice because they come in and you know what we tell them? Pick, right? We tell them to pick a major. They don't know anything about a major, right? They don't know anything about these majors. They have most of them have no real substantive basis for choosing the major. We tell them to pick a major. We tell them to pick some courses, right? We tell them to pick. And it's no wonder that they don't pick very well. It's overwhelming choice. And so what we did at Georgia State is try to structure those choices. And we used a very old concept, but I'm going to tell you how we innovated with it. And I think that this is something that Provost Walker is interested in exploring how it could work at CSUN is we have 25 students at Georgia State who take all their first semester courses together. Right? And again, there's a lot of integrated support. It's an old concept. We started in 1999. Of course, students have a common experience. And, we do what I call freshman learning community light because the textbook version would have real integration, right? And integrated assignments and faculty teams working together. And we had that once. It suffered in the recession and it never came back. But we found that even just based on the cohort model, there were real advantages to ordering students this way, right? So it was very helpful in terms of first-year retention. It was helpful in terms of first-year GPA. And even more exciting, the 4-year, 5-year, and 6-year retention rate continued to see benefits from students who had been in learning communities. Historically, we gave students the opportunity to opt in to the learning community model. And you know how many opted in? About half. Even though we would say, oh, we have this great program, so helpful, helps your GPA, half would tell us no. So we changed it to an opt-out model. And just like organ donation, same dynamic. No one ever really says, no, I don't want to do that. Right? It's possible to, but they don't. We represent that really this is the way that you register at Georgia State. And 95% of the non-honors freshmen participate. And about 15% overall of students opt out. So the vast majority of students now are participating in this. And we added to the learning communities the concept of meta major. And meta major was really helpful. It's the meta major that was really very helpful to us in lowering the number of students who change majors because we organized the learning communities based on these large academic areas. And so students come into the university and they say, yes, I know what I want to do. I want to be an accounting major. We say, that's great, and we mark it in our system, but we put them into the business meta major, where they can learn accounting requires math, right? And I'm not being funny. You met these students. You know them. You know them. Sometimes they're not aware of those small details. Right? But in the meta major, they can be exposed to those small details and can make more informed choices. Our goal is by the end of the first year that they be in a major where they can progress. We also added the block schedules. Now, I know we did a lot, but it's all very helpful. Block schedules gives the students a choice, basically, of when to go to class. So we have some schedules, because remember, we're laying out all 5 or 6 classes, 15 hours. 15 hours, very helpful, right? Because now they don't have to choose to take 15 hours. We organize it so they can take 15 hours, and they can all get schedules that make sense. Because what was happening was the students, the best students, who come real early in orientation, I don't know how many orientations you do during the summer. Do you do a lot or just a few? 27, so that's a lot. So the good students, they show up early. They get the best of everything because everything is available. Way back down in August, later, the students who have a different academic profile show up. And there's nothing left for them, right? Nothing that makes sense. Right? The 8 o'clock in the morning class and the 4 o'clock in the afternoon class with nothing in between. Every day of the week. Right? Nobody would do that. It's not rational to do that. And so what we did was we organized their schedules. We pre-organized the schedule. So if you say you're your business major when you come to orientation, we say, look, we have 6 or 5 or 6 different choices of schedules for you to take. And the student chooses a schedule, a morning schedule, an afternoon schedule. It could be a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule or Tuesday, Thursday schedule. And it really has allowed for a lot better management of course availability because we just keep rolling out these schedules. That's very helpful. This is probably how most of us, learned to schedule. You had a class here, a class there. That doesn't work for students who work or who commute, who travel, who would want to, Atlanta traffic is bad. I hear LA traffic is worse. All right? Asking students to travel long distances for schedules that don't make sense was really a drag on progression because they couldn't enroll in the classes. And so now we might give them a morning schedule, something that looks like this. And these are some examples of, the schedules. That first one looks like it's an afternoon schedule. The second one is a morning schedule. The third one is a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. And again, the students choose schedule. For the vast majority, these are all courses, because we set them up, that work for the meta major. It guarantees progression, right? It guarantees that the students are in the right courses that they need to progress. We cover all demand. No department is left out. No department is left out. So, if it's a very small religious studies department that maybe has only 50 or, 100 students, we cover their demand. Intro to psychology that might have 1,500 students, we cover that demand. All right? And it really has set up a much better situation for our students. We are also trying to embed more and more career information into our meta majors. And again, this is such a great opportunity because sometimes small departments in particular get exposure in ways that they might not otherwise get. So if you're a religious studies major, I don't know, not picking on religious studies, but if you're religious studies, it's usually a relatively small major, and many students don't know much about it. In the meta major setup, faculty have all kinds of opportunities to put together programming for students to help them understand, hey, is this of something that would be of interest to them? Putting in also the meta major really has allowed us in the first year to integrate a lot more career content. So this is an example of some seed grants, because we've had some seed grants the last several years where faculty have been able to rework some of the assignments in their classes, not the learning outcomes. It's not a major overhaul of every component of the class, but just some of the assignments of the class to help students understand what competencies, professional competencies that they're learning in their class. And so history took up using data visualization techniques in that basic introduction to world history and introduction to American history classes, and have really reworked the assignments, just the assignments that the students have to complete in their classes, in ways that have the students now clamoring to take history. We've been able to roll it out more and more because they're starting to see the professional relevance. And it's not just in history, it's in many of the classes in, the first year classes in the core curriculum. And we also rolled out an e-portfolio. Our version of the e-portfolio is something called Portfolium, right? No magic in the e-portfolio other than we're able to introduce that in the first semester, introduce the students to the professional competencies, introduce them to how you present yourself visually. And again, the magic is that they are starting to think about what is the professional relevance of what I'm learning in ways that our students haven't done before. And it's starting to pay off. In 2015, we looked. There were only 809 visits by pre-seniors to the Career Center. In fact, the most common time that a student went to the Career Center, senior year, second semester. Way too late, right? They just didn't have the, now I'm ready for a job. Well, no, probably not. There's a strategy. We could put it together. And so some of these efforts that we have really, tried to lay with our first year students in increasing the relevance of the curriculum in their minds, right? Because I maintain the curriculum has always been relevant. English, writing, communication skills, this is not new stuff. You're going to need to be able to do that. But sometimes they don't understand the relevance of it. And so we're able to communicate that, and we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of students who are seeking out this help. And the drop in major changes after the freshman year has gone down more than 30%. Again, that saves a lot of time and money. We've also focused a lot on DFW rates, high DFW rates. Not a good thing, right? We saw in our math classes in 2008 that literally 43% of the students were receiving a D, an F, or a W. And that had been going on semester after semester after semester with no breaks. So we changed how we did math at Georgia State for pre-calculus, college algebra, and introduction to statistics. And we changed to the Emporium model with adaptive learning exercises. We use Newton products primarily, but there are many other vendors. And our version was the student would spend an hour in the class, but then 3 hours in the lab with support. And like magic, the grades went up. And I don't say like magic, but you can imagine if a student isn't any good in math, or feels like they're not any good in math, and they run into a problem, doing a math problem, and you sit there and you stare at the page for 5 or 10 minutes, what is the rational thing to do after that? Close the book and go do something else, right? And now, of course, I'm being a little, tongue-in-cheek. We would want them to seek out assistance, and we understand all that. But most of them just going to close the book. With this model, they don't get to close the book. They're sitting there and they're actually doing math. And when they do it, they run into a problem that, someone will come and help them over that problem, and they will continue to do math. And they will continue to learn, and the DFW rate has dropped significantly. That's the other thing at Georgia State. When we see that it works, we scale it up. Because it's not good to help, 100 students or 150 students. You got to help them all, right? And so we changed how we offer math. 8,500 seats about year over year. We calculate that's an extra 1,275 students who pass their classes, their math class every year. Huge implications. We have a state-sponsored scholarship. You have to have a 3.0. If you get an F in math, it's going to be hard to maintain that. With our low-income students, if they can't maintain it, they won't stay in school. And so we're also expanding adaptive learning in really exciting ways. Adaptive learning at scale. We've got a grant from the Gates Foundation to really move about 19,000 seats. And again, this is all faculty initiated. This is not the central administration. It's, the departments, faculty have looked and said, hey, there may be ways that we can help our DFW rates. The red ones are what's underway this year. And it's not automatic. It's not magic, right? If you look at the launch, these are the pass rates in adaptive sections compared to face-to-face. The first semester, particularly in macroeconomics, the story was not, that was Mary Beth's college. Mary Beth's college. They were not outstanding. right? They were not outstanding. But adaptations, changes, we're starting to see very positive outcomes from adaptive learning techniques and in doing them at scale. We also do a lot in the area of supplemental instruction. I know supplemental instruction is an old concept, but we have found that for first-generation students, low-income students, underrepresented minority students, sometimes the hurdle, you know this, you have office hours. When I was teaching, I had office hours. No one ever came. I tried to be a nice, friendly, open, welcoming. They didn't come, right? There are all kinds of barriers to accessing. In fact, it really does take a little bit of chutzpah to go up to a professor and say, you know what? I know you just spent the last 2 hours teaching that class. I got nothing. Can you teach me again? Can you explain it again? Right? That's kind of hard to do. Supplemental instruction, where you have a peer tutoring, basically a peer model, works really effectively at Georgia State, and we've scaled that up. We have really almost 1,000 sections that have supplemental instruction attached to them. 1,000. These were the number of students who were being dropped each semester. Georgia has a law that we cannot extend any gratuity. And the way that law is interpreted is that if a student isn't paid by the end of the first week of school in full, extending their payment would be a gratuity. Now, that's a harsh interpretation, but that's the Georgia interpretation. And so we were dropping literally thousands of students sometimes, students who were in good academic standing, students who had registered for their classes, students who wanted to go to school. We just drop them after all that work and investment. These students, when we looked at the data, were disproportionately seniors. They were academically on track, and they owed less than $1,500. Now, this is ridiculous. These are many students who've gone to public school in Georgia, so we're deep in investing in the state of Georgia in these students, right? Many of them have had the state-sponsored scholarship. State-sponsored scholarship in the state of Georgia only pays for 127 hours, so a lot of people, 127 attempted hours. So a lot of people run out of the state-sponsored scholarship. So we've been sponsoring a lot of them through most of college. They're right here at the end, and we drop them. We launched something known as the Panther Retention Grant, which is a last dollar scholarship. The idea came, it was a gift from our president. He gave us $40,000, I think it was in 2011, which is a large gift, but nothing compared to compared to what students owe. And literally at that time, we went from the bottom of the list upwards to seeing who we could help. And we called the students up and said, instead of being dropped, we need you to keep going to class because, Georgia State University is pleased to offer you a Panther Retention Scholarship. And you know what the students did when we first started this? They hung up the phone because they thought it was a hoax. No one from Georgia State would be calling to help, literally. But we've been able to scale that up. And the average grant for our students was $900 for the Panther Retention Grant. And 86.5% of the students who received the Panther Retention Grant have graduated within 2 semesters. Past year, 1,300 recipients of the grant. Since 2011, we've given 15,000 of these grants to our students. Almost 6,000 students were dropping out of Georgia State every year. Now, Georgia State is a large school. We got about 50,000, 5,000 dropping out. We engaged in a large predictive analytic project with EAB, and I know that you also are an EAB institution, most of the schools in California. We took our data, 10 years of academic data, There's 2.5 million grades, and we came up with 800 academically based alerts. We track 30,000 undergraduates every day for these alerts. Some of these alerts are common sense. Like, if a student needs to progress in a class and doesn't register for the class, or drops the class, or withdraws from the class, maybe we should reach out, right? Historically, what have we done? At Georgia State, we were doing absolutely nothing, right? So some of these alerts, many of them are common sense. Sometimes people are, oh, the data and the analytics, and there are some complicated analytics, but there's also some basic analytics, right? And basic things that we were tracking. Because we had academic maps. Hopefully you have academic maps, right? And we had the grades that seem to predict success in the next course. You should go back and check those, by the way, right? Because at Georgia State, we just made stuff up. Now, you're probably not doing that here, but we would have faculty meetings, and somebody would say, well, that class needs a prereq. And somebody else would say, oh, I think about a C. Yeah, C. C it is, right? And we rarely went back and actually looked at the data. Sometimes they were right. Sometimes they were not right, right? But we had these maps, and we had these grades, and we laid out kind of a progression. You should also do that if you haven't done it. Make sure the students can graduate in 4 years. We found, in some cases, it was not possible. The courses were not offered in any kind of reasonable way. Offered at the same time, you offered conflict. Just, there's a lot to unpack, even in doing this. But assuming all this is working perfectly well, we have to communicate it to the student in some way. And that's really what we weren't doing. And some of this impact can be dramatic. I mentioned this a little earlier to a group that I was talking to. Look at that middle chart. If you get an A or B in political science and go on to major in political science at Georgia State, those students are graduating at about a 75% rate, which is a good rate for Georgia State University. But if you get a C in that first class, the graduation rate plummets to about 25%. And what did we do historically? You got it, absolutely nothing. Right? And you can see that if they get a C in the first class and then try to persist, it's not going to be a strong argument for success. Right? We need to talk about, is there a reading deficit or a writing deficit? If it's a partying, well, not a deficit, whatever the opposite of, of partying is, or, maybe they're working too much. Whatever it is, we need to talk to the student about what that looks like so that they can do better, they can perform better. Last year at Georgia State, we had more than 60,000 in-person, one-on-one visits. This is actually just on the Atlanta campus that were prompted by alerts, right? So the advisors would reach out on the basis of that. And we've seen against the baseline years, when we implemented this kind of outreach, retention rates from fall to spring skyrocketed. This is a relative skyrocket, right? Relative skyrocket. And even more, a variable that had been very difficult for us to move, credit hours at completion. Look, it only takes 120 hours to graduate. We got 140. Like you, we have a lot of transfer students who come in. Sometimes they come in with lots and lots of credits. It was not moving. Now we're driving that down. And again, this saves the students money. In fact, we estimate that the students who graduated in 2019 compared to the class of 2012 saved $18 million for the students. And this is the thing that a lot of times people critique. Say, we know what you're doing. You're just moving people to easier majors. Right? We look for that. And we find no evidence of that whatsoever. What we're doing is supporting them early, and that allows them to pursue their interest more vigorously. So these are STEM degrees conferred at Georgia State since 2011 with the enrollment change in parentheses. And you can see that the number of black students who are receiving STEM degrees has gone up 167%. The number of black male students, 221%. The number of Hispanic students, 388%. Much more than their enrollment change across the associated period. So it's really not moving students out. This concern that the underrepresented students are, going to be shuffled to easier majors. That's not what's happening at Georgia State. And this was a hard lift for us in terms of academic advising. 2011, lots of words on this screen. What it says is that academic advising was a mess at Georgia State in 2011. The average ratio, 750 to 800 to 1. In arts and sciences, with our largest college, the ratio was 1,200 students to one advisor. All you can do is put out fires under those circumstances. You can't be proactive. We had no tracking. In fact, 2011 was the year after I started in this role, and I was charged with answering the question, how many students are we seeing in academic advisement? It's like, I got it. I'm going to go find this out. This is not hard. How many? Not how well, not strategic, not this, how many? Count them. And literally, in many of our offices, we were counting with hash marks. It was impossible to say how many students were being seen. So really problematic. Now we've invested heavily in academic advisement. Our ratios are 300 to 1. We've gone to professional advisement model. But we don't want faculty to talk any less to students. We just don't want faculty to do distribution requirements and the like. I'm a faculty member. I did some crazy stuff in terms of advising because, I only advised once a year and didn't know always what the rules were. But I could talk about career. I could talk about graduate schools, and still do. So professional advisors have really helped us, and we really invested a lot in terms of creating common metrics and common record keeping and communication, because when students change majors, we were like the doctor's office, like medical records. Remember when medical records were folders? Right? That's what we were doing. And if a student changed majors, well, that medical record went into a room, to be locked, never to be seen again. We could do better than that for the students. And I know you've invested a lot in academic advising as well, because we were helping the students in academic advising who didn't need help, right? We're helping very good students. You don't improve your graduation rate for very good students because they're going to graduate anyway. And we're helping students who struggle, who it's hard to raise your graduation rate with students who struggle. And the students in the middle just kind of fly under the radar screen, the B, C student, and those are the students that now we're able to target a lot more effectively and get better results. We've moved to a very student-centered advising model where every student has an individual education plan. The hallmark of advising at Georgia State is the proactive nature of risk targeting. We try to reach out proactively. We call it GPS advising. Just like the GPS in your car, just like Waze does not let you go 30 miles off course and then say, oh, by the way, you're 30 miles off course. We did that. We did do the equivalent of that, because a student would register for the wrong course. They would take the wrong course. They would earn a grade in the wrong course. And then 2 semesters later, they come see somebody, and what would we say? Oh, that was the wrong course. It's just amazing, right? That's the equivalent of going 30 miles out of the way. So we try not to let that happen, and we intervene personally with the students and try to organize the information in a way that empowers them to make the very best decision. The impacts have been dramatic. Right? This is a picture of about a year and a half ago, when Bill Gates invited himself to campus. He did. He was in Atlanta to do some kind of big lecture, and he called up and said, after the lecture, I'd like to come over and learn about what you're doing at Georgia State. So we said, no, you can't come. No, of course, he could come. Right? And he came, and it wasn't a presidential visit. It wasn't a very fancy visit. He literally met with me. It's Tim Rennick, who's my boss, and some students. And we talked about some of the work that's going on at Georgia State. And this is him, interacting with our students. Georgia State's gotten a lot of attention and been written up a lot of different places. We have this in the airport now, that we're the second most innovative school in the country. We don't usually pay much attention to the U.S. News and World Report, but when they say something nice about us, we brag about it. Other than that, we're like number 200 and something, and we don't pay attention. And we don't pay a lot of attention to those kinds of things. The return on investment is significant for us. We calculate that for every 1 point increase in our retention, that translates to about $3 million extra a year at Georgia State. So really good return on investment. But of course, the students are the reason why. Right? None of the rest of this stuff matters, ultimately. It's the students. And we've seen a notable increase in the number of degrees that we award by more efficiently moving students through our pipeline. And if you look at the degrees awarded by group, African American students, the percentage change up 124% since 2009-10. We often go back to 2009-10 because that was the year of our strategic plan and our new president, at least at that time. An increase in the number of low-income students and an increase in the Hispanic student population of almost 189, almost 190%. And when you look at the clearinghouse data and add that in, Georgia State students, there's no achievement gap, right? For the 5th year in a row, African American students, Hispanic students, and low-income students have graduated at or above the rate of the student body overall. And we're happy at Georgia State to, report that we produce more African American students with bachelor's degrees than any not-for-profit school in the country, right? And take that very seriously. And it makes a difference. And I was looking at CSUN, some of the information, and I know that this university makes a real difference in the lives of its students. And there's some really good social mobility information out there about this university as well. But, sometimes, the students will look at, just the money that you make right after college, and there's a lot of metrics out there, right, that sometimes don't reflect that great on the kinds of students that we serve and on our institutions. But, I like these measures of social mobility, because they measure how the student, the student's family was doing when the student was admitted to the university, and then 10 years, usually 10, 15 years after graduation. And you can see the difference that the college degree makes in the trajectory of that family. Georgia State is number 1 in the state of Georgia, and number 25, according to Brookings, number 25 in the entire nation in terms of social mobility, and making a difference in the trajectory of the student and their family. And, we've had lots of good accolades, the South is not always known for innovation and academic achievement and education, that kind of thing. But we're trying to change what that looks like. And the perception is changing because we're really trying to make a difference in our community. And Perimeter College, I'm happy to report to you that the year before consolidation, 2014, the graduation rate at that two-year school was 6.5%. Not good. 2019, the graduation rate was up to 19%. Doing many of these same things, proactive advising, the implementation of meta majors, the implementation of Success Academy, reviewing the curriculum. We moved also, as Provost Walker was saying, from developmental math and developmental English. The year before were consolidated with Perimeter, they had 3 levels of developmental math before you got to collegiate level, and 3 levels of developmental reading and writing before you got to college level. And the entire state of Georgia, indeed, moved to a co-requisite model. And it's part of the success story of what's going on at Perimeter College. We have a cohort of students that we call the State Farm Lift program. State Farm gave Georgia State a large grant about the same time as consolidation to target development in the weakest campus. This is the campus that is located in southwest DeKalb County, economically a very underperforming area. We admitted there are about 40 students actually who received the State Farm Scholarship. 100% of them were Pell eligible. 100% of them were for underrepresented minority groups. We admitted them through what we call Perimeter Academy, which is the equivalent of the Success Academy, learning communities. This is our whole slate of programs: predictive analytics, proactive advising. We gave them scholarships, retention grants, SI, peer mentoring, just the whole financial literacy training, the whole slate of activities. The 2-year associate degree receiving rate for that group, 85%. Almost all those students earned their associate's degree, right, on time. 6.5% had been the graduation rate of that population overall. As a university community, we don't control everything. There's a lot of things that are outside of our control. And there's a lot of blame to go around. But we have the ability to generate some better outcomes. Really, that's the Georgia State story. That some of these innovative practices and thinking through how they can apply on our campus can produce change and can produce better outcomes. And that's what we're looking for. Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions? You have a question? Yeah. Yes.
So what I want to do is reinforce 2 of the things that you brought up. The first is your notion of the meta major.
They're taking a microphone to him.
The notion of the meta major, we certainly have fairs that individual departments hold to recruit majors, And the meta majors, as you described them, seem to resemble our college structure. But I'm not aware of a kind of mandatory orientation for entering first-year students who would be informed what exactly that major that they have opted for entails. This is particularly important for colleges on this campus, like the College of Engineering and Computer Science, because students arrive, all of society says, get a degree in engineering and or computer science. And like the students you described at Georgia State, they don't always know that that entails math. This creates big trouble for the College of Engineering and Computer Science because they own those students the moment they declared the major, even when they don't make it into the major. So I think that idea is a really good one, and since you told us so much, I'd just like to repeat it. The other one, quickly again from reading assessment reports, and particularly following first-year writing instruction, your discovery that C students in some of these, what we call core competencies, especially in this case I'm talking about first-year writing, C students are not necessarily well set to go on to college success. This was also discovered at the University of Arizona, which ran a study and saw that that C student is actually a student that needs help. I won't say any more. It's just that the many things you told us, much of which I think this campus is doing, much of which is at the administrative level, I think are very much worth, I don't think our campus is looking at things that way. Those two things are very much worth our attending to. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments?
It's not really a question, but it's an observation of something you showed there. At one point, you showed that there were really good teachers at Georgia State. And I know that when you have high DUF rates, sometimes it's not just students. So I don't want to put people on the spot, but I think it's something we really need to talk about very carefully here, and that is how we improve our teaching. At the same time, we use all these other tools to help our students become successful. Can you tell a little bit about what you did there at Georgia State in that regard?
Yeah, so, it was a multi-pronged approach, but it became really unacceptable semester after semester to have high DFW rates, right? Yeah, we want better students. And yes, the students need to be better prepared. But part of the mandate as instructors is to learn how to teach these students, right? And so there is a lot of support through, everyone has a Center for Instructional Innovation of some magnitude, or Center for Instructional Technology, or there's some equivalent of that, and they offer a lot of support for how to change classes. Some colleges actually have mentoring programs and supportive, I don't say lessons, but put people in faculty learning communities actually to focus on how they could improve instruction in particular courses. And some faculty were sent to conferences and that kind of thing to learn different techniques. So really just the whole range. And, we look for grade inflation because, whenever we start talking about, there'll be grade inflation, every couple of years we actually go look for grade inflation, literally, to make sure, that we don't have grade inflation, right? But we set a different context, and the department chairs actually, it's not okay to have a DFW rate of 35%. Continually. It's not okay, right? There's some onus on the instructor to improve instruction. And we've built that into our promotion and tenure track, and it's the expectation of our provost and of our deans that work happen. Mary Beth was a dean. You have anything, any other things that we did that you might think of? She might not,
The only other thing I would add is that the Center for Instructional for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, actually that chairs were proactive in saying, now I noticed you struggled in such and such a class. Why don't you go over there? And then we would follow up and make sure that they had gone. So, the classes got bigger and bigger at Georgia State especially during the recession. And so learning there's great techniques for large classroom instruction if you learn them. And so, that was one of the things that we asked people to do. So we took it seriously, as Allison says.
I mean, many of you know, because you came out of graduate school. Some of you learned to teach in graduate school. Some of us never saw a teaching class in graduate school, right? Hopefully things have changed a lot, but, when I came through graduate school, there were no classes in teaching. Zero, right? And so, my first year, we had a class of 220 students, and I'm the instructor, and I look about as old as they do. And how do you control a class like that, right? You have to learn, right? And so, Georgia State has really put together a better infrastructure for learning, but also really holding people accountable for improvements in instruction over time.
Allison, thank you so very much. Maybe you've begun to ask what is my question, and is, a good idea doesn't make for change. How do you actually change culture so that change can emerge?
Well, I think that one of the things that was really important, Georgia State went through a strategic planning process, and you don't need a full strategic planning process, but we got really clear on what our first priority was. And our first priority was students, literally. And in fact, the strategic goal number 1 is kind of like a mantra. It's going to be national model for undergraduate education, demonstrating that students from all backgrounds can achieve academic and career success at high rates, right? And decisions by the administration flowed to support that. And that helps set the context. We had good leadership, I guess, is what one of the elements that I think helps a lot. And I think it's probably true at this university as well. People who stay here, who are here and stay here because you love the students and you believe in what you're doing. And if really can really marshal that, right, and be willing to make some alterations, make some changes, because that's really what it took, right? So a willingness to make the changes. And we started, you say how you build the culture. We started to share little wins, right? Little wins. Right? We're big on piloting things. We would pilot and we would share the results of little wins. The math department is the one that started the adaptive learning work, but we would share and praise and reward people who were doing work that we wanted to grow. And other departments were like, oh, math? We can do that. We can do better than math, right? This is math, right? Yeah. No offense to math professors, And it started to grow kind of organically. So, good, strong leadership creates the environment, ideas, but, we really have all gotten behind that mission, and now student success really is our brand.
Great.
Yeah.
If I could ask one more question. There are a lot of individuals here who are from student affairs. Talk to us about what we do to support change.
So, absolutely. So, recently, part of my responsibilities, basically I'm now the Vice President of Student Affairs. We don't have that title, but we have a lot of those responsibilities. And one of the things that we're really working on in Student Affairs is developing metrics, a language about how we too contribute to student success outcomes, because we absolutely do. In student affairs, contribute to the student success outcomes, but we didn't talk about the student success outcomes much in student affairs. We didn't talk about the contributions to retention, right? And how involvement in student organizations and involvement in the programs that come out of student life actually contribute. We know it, right? The student development theory and all the way we organize, we know it, but we don't measure it. And at Georgia State, a lot of that flows from measuring and communicating it, right? Communicating the impact. We're tying very directly right now to college to career, because student life is not just about having fun, right? And that. It's not about just student development, but one of the anchors that you can tie to is helping students recognize and develop the kind of competencies that they need to succeed in life, and being more intentional about articulating that. We're laying out involvement maps for our students, right? So by meta major, this is some of the work that we're doing right now, right? Because there are things that STEM students, a menu of things that they might want to take advantage of, that some of them will find, the good students, and some of them will never find. But if we lay out involvement maps for them and build on the meta majors, which is something that's working at Georgia State, now we've got to think about, student affairs. How can we tie in to that as well? Right? So there's a lot of opportunity. It's very exciting work, right? Very exciting work and very beneficial in the lives of the students. There's a question up there.
Hello, my name is Renee Martinez. I'm one of the academic advisors in EOP, and I'm also a union rep for the advisors.
Yes.
So I'm always talking, right?
Okay.
So what I wanted to know is what either your experience or your recommendation, like you said, moving towards honoring the work of the academic advisors, the professional advisors. And we haven't had a really great history here. Hopefully we'll have a growing one with our new provost, of actually looking for the expertise that those folks bring to the table and follow what you're talking about, sharing, praising, rewarding. In other words, really bringing them into the conversation if they're going to be put in this position of responsibility to, in some ways, save what's going on. So I'm just kind of curious either how you did that or how you'd recommend that happens.
So, one of the things that you are absolutely right. Advisors know a lot, right? They know a lot about progression, absolutely. Because they know when the class is not available. They know students who don't get through particular classes. They know the roadblocks and that kind of thing. What I love about EAB as a product and some of the predictive analytic work is that it empowers academic advisors. It's not a radical reconstruction of the work that you've always been doing. It's that now, instead of saying, I kind of feel that, or, you actually have the empirical data to share with the students, right? So, to me, it's part and parcel of the work. It's not new work that we're asking academic advisors to do. We're bringing new tools to them to empower them to do the work, right? And we have done a lot at Georgia State in terms of creating new leadership opportunities, creating new structures, new boards, new sets of trainings for academic advisors, new recognition, at least, in one of the offices that I oversee is the University Advisement Office that has more than 70, well, more than that if you include Perimeter College, probably about 100, more than 100 academic advisors are in these offices. And we've set up reward structures, to recognize advisors who have gone and done exemplary work. Right? And given them opportunities to be leaders in the unit and to share. We do a lot of professional development opportunities, and our people are doing presentations at NACADA and about some of the the quality of the work that they're doing. And the university is recognizing the quality of that work. As well. We could talk a long time. We created a new career trajectory, a career ladder for academic advisors. We just used to have 2 academic advisors, you kind of academic advisor 1 or academic advisor 2. Now we have 3 levels of academic advisors, and there's all kind of management advisors. We have specialized advisors, I didn't even talk about, advisors who help make students make transitions, right? So if you can't progress in one discipline, what we found was the advisor in the discipline where you are, that advisor doesn't help you because that advisor doesn't advise people out of that discipline. And then the new advisor won't take you because you're not yet in their population in the college. And so you just got to figure it out. That's not a good plan, right? And so we have special, sort of more advanced advisors who help students who have to make transitions, who maybe don't get it. And then we have people called graduation counselors. And what are they in charge of? Making sure the people who can graduate do graduate. And you would think that that wouldn't be a big thing. That's a big thing, right? Because you tell them what to do, and then they do something else. Or they can't get the class that they need. That class will only be offered in, fall of 2020. We're going to still graduate people in the spring? So there, someone needs to intervene. So there's all kinds of things in terms of a career ladder with, compensation. We worked with human resources. So lots of things, can be done. But again, I don't consider it a radical reconstruction of what the advisor has done. Has always done. I consider it giving advisors tools to do their jobs more efficiently and more effectively. Other questions or comments?
I'm sorry, but I have to ask this belligerent question. How much does all of this cost? Because this is an issue.
Yeah. Well, some of it, at our university, the way the budget has worked is that our administration has allowed us, meaning the student success arm, to keep some of the additional revenues generated. So if you increase one retention rate, remember it's $3 million, you hire a lot of advisors for $3 million, right? Now, we don't usually get all $3 million, but we do get a portion of that money. And so, the way that our senior vice president for finance thinks about it, this doesn't cost, it actually pays. It pays in terms of retention. It pays in terms of progression. It pays in graduation rates. It pays in terms of revenue. It's paying in terms of our reputation as an institution. It's paying. But there were some initial investments, but it pays. The benefits greatly outstrip the costs. Other questions? Okay, then. Thank you very much for being such a kind audience.
Well, I just hate to follow that. I don't have anything as interesting to say, but I will say thank you again so much for being here and being part of this. I think we've got a couple things coming up in the spring semester, and I hope you will all stay, and we're having a reception, and then you can ask all the questions to Allison that you were maybe shy of asking in the group, okay? So thank you all very much.